When I first started thinking about how I could make my writing great, the first question that came to mind was, how impressive can I make this? For years, my focus was on boosting the line level specificity to the point of surrealism and making sure every detail I chose was groundbreaking in some sort of way. But when I delved deeper into writing I had previously deemed unimpressive, I started to realize that writing isn't just about the words on the page, and that sometimes what you don't say or what you don't specify is as important as what you do. It's no secret, I love prose. I love admiring language. I love tweaking the line level so it shines, and also making lists of beautiful words I love so much. Specificity has always been one of the top 3 pillars of if I thought writing was great or not. But when I started running into writers who did the opposite of what I deemed great, it started to get me thinking about the role specificity plays in my own writing and how I could expand my mindset of using it as a tool. So what makes great writing? That is the question. Forget about any questions Shakespeare asked. This is the question. So when I set out to make this video on what makes great writing, my first thought was to think about the writers I'd been reading recently who were really utilizing vagueness and sort of this anti-specificity in a way that was very interesting to me. Oftentimes they'd use this sparsity that would create sparky images and very memorable voicey characters. So when I went into defining what I thought great writing was, I tried to get away from prescribing elements of craft onto the definition. I didn't want to come up here and say good writing is specific when I had read so much writing that was not specific. So here is my definition / formula. Of course, formula is so antithetical to everything I believe in writing, but just to make it easier to understand this video, I did write it down this way. Rachel Wright's opinion of what makes good writing is a commitment in style plus a fully embodied presence plus a stable foundation equals the impact, which equals an experience of great writing. First of all, great writing is committed in style. So writing that is committed to itself on the line level. And we could break this down even further to how you write. Other words that might make this kind of lofty definition make more sense is diction, syntax, consistency, things like this. Number 2 being fully embodied presence. That is writing that knows its voice and fully absorbs it. So we can also think about it as how it feels, how the writing feels. Some other words might be voice, character, intention, and then a stable foundation. This is writing that can support itself or how you understand it. Other words to understand this could be storytelling, theme, causality, plot. I want to pop up a few diagrams I created to sort of illustrate how this looks in my head. But of course, art is so subjective that these are just my thoughts. The definitions are really abstract. They are moving, sort of like goalposts. There's no sort of end line to any of these definitions. And also it might not make any sense because it's just coming from my head. I can further simplify what I think of as great writing as style layered over voice, which is then layered over story. And again, these are generalizations. It's really hard to make a video about great writing when everybody in the entire world has a completely different idea of what makes writing great to them. The reason I wanted to make this video is because for a while I had been scripting a video on sparsity versus specificity, because for the last 2-3 years I've been reading a lot of writing that is not as specifically dense as some of the writing I was really drawn toward, in my late teens, very early 20s. Since I'm 23, we're kind of making our way almost 24. So I thought it would be great to marry a video on what great writing looks like with this video that was showcasing examples of sort of bad practices that I might have called bad practices in writing, but that actually were super, super effective. So I have been collecting excerpts that utilize vagueness and a lack of specificity, utilizes a broadness to a very successful effect, in my opinion, and we'll go through every single one of them. There's a great range of excerpts, and I can make a more in-depth video on sparsity and specificity and when you might want to use both if you want to hear it, so let me know. These are examples that, in my opinion, they sort of defy expectations of what I used to view as good writing. In my opinion, these examples embody the principles of style, presence, and foundation. And they do this without clinging too closely to specificity. Sometimes the excerpts are vague, sometimes they might be a little bit lofty. They're the opposite of what I used to think of as good writing. And in my opinion, they're very effective. So I think there's something to learn here in looking at writing that isn't like your own, because now I find myself utilizing a lot of these techniques myself. The first one comes from Cleanness by Garth Greenwell. We're actually going to look at two Garth Greenwell excerpts from Cleanness because I love Garth Greenwell. So both of them come from the Loving R section of Cleanness, and this is the first one. It was a lovely garden, its shrubs and flowers rare in Ladost, a green relief among the concrete desolation of so much of the neighborhood. So there are a few elements here that kind of lean into this vagueness, this sparsity that kind of leaves the image up to interpretation, but not in a way that's confusing. So let's look at it was a lovely garden. It was a lovely garden. He just says it like that. He doesn't have to over-explain that there are zinnias in the corner and that the soil smelled freshly wet with rain. And he could have explained that. And going down that route with details is another route of writing. But what I love here is that Garth Greenwell shows us that you don't have to have that route of writing for an image to be effective. It was a lovely garden. He's just summarizing that the garden was beautiful. We kind of have to trust him on that. It's shrubs and flowers, rare in Lados, but we don't get an idea of what kind of shrubs they are, what kind of flowers they are. And sometimes I will pull for those details. And what I notice will happen is I'll sort of clog down my writing, my image with so many details that I become desensitized to those details. So sometimes sparsity actually uplifts an image because it allows it room to breathe rather than sort of bogging it down with specific details. A green relief among the concrete desolation of so much of the neighborhood. This in itself is another one of these kind of vague, like looser, more abstract phrases, but it works so beautifully because Garth Greenwell already has a very poetic style. So in my mind, I see this sort of rolling hills, rolling grasses kind of image, or the vibe that that image gives me. And I don't really need any more details. So I think this is a beautiful excerpt. And the next one is also beautiful. It's one of the ones I can't forget. Whenever I read Cleanness, I always like pause. So the main character and his boyfriend R have met up at a cafe. R studied every page, and then he ordered what he always did, pointing to it mutely with a smile as he angled the menu toward the waitress. A salad of greens and strips of eggplant covered in a sweet dressing that he loved. I'm going to talk about this a little bit with the Martyr excerpt, so keep an eye out. What I love about this excerpt is there's like a ping pong between sparsity, specificity, vagueness, specificity. You know, there's a lot moving in this excerpt, and we don't have to know every single detail in order for the salad to sound absolutely delicious. I keep thinking about the salad. Like, I don't know where I can get it. Like, do I need to go to Bulgaria to get this salad? Like, how do I make this salad? After that little bit of specificity, we bounce back to sort of a moment of both and a sweet dressing that he loved. Sweet in itself is a specifier, but it's also a little bit vague still. It kind of showcases a beautiful, tender love that the narrator has for R. He just knows that this is a sweet dressing that he loved. He doesn't need to explain that R loves the specific dressing, which is like a tahini maple dressing that, you know, he only could get at this one place. It's like the narrator isn't even really paying close attention to describing the dressing because he's so used to R always having the dressing and just knows that R loves the dressing. So yeah, this might be getting like Blue Curtains vibes, but what I'm trying to show is sometimes the broadness does leave room for a reader to impress upon their own opinion of the image, but also an opinion of why it might be described that way to the narrator. What does that reveal about the character describing this in such a vague way? The next one is one of my favorite examples of vagueness, and it is from a short story called Fairy Tale by Alexandra Kleeman. I was sitting at a long table with a lot of nice things on it. There was a large pitcher of water with an ornate handle that looked like it was made of real silver, and there were forks and spoons. Kleeman focuses so microscopically on very boring everyday details to the point where that focus makes the details seem a little bit fantastical, a little quirky. It is so interesting to hyper-focus on forks and spoons when forks and spoons seem so boring. So my question as a reader is, Why is that happening? And what is the tone that is created through this utilization of vagueness in the prose? And to me, what it creates is this feeling of bizarreness, because in our everyday lives, we're not noticing a large pitcher of water and we're not describing it that way in our heads. But when the details are so vaguely described, they themselves sort of become specific in their vagueness, so much so that it becomes a little uncanny. This is an example, in my opinion, of using vague details, but there are so many of them and they call so much attention to themselves that it feels specific and it creates this almost like unsettling horror story vibe. So that's another example of where vagueness can be used as specificity in itself. The next excerpt is from Lydia Yuknevich's novel Smallbacks of Children. He consumes another half bottle of wine in the space of time most people would say they were considering an idea or looking at an object with interest. These are such vague phrases. They were considering an idea or looking at an object with interest. We don't even really learn much from those phrases because considering an idea, what idea? Looking at an object with interest, what object? And what does the interest entail? Why this sentence is so effective is because the painter is drinking. The vagueness kind of amplifies the separation he feels like from himself while he's drinking. He's so disconnected from himself. He's so out of it that nothing he's really thinking matters or makes sense. And does that say anything about the character? Which, if you read this section of the book, I think it does. I just think it's such a beautiful phrase. In the space of time, most people would say they were considering an idea or looking at an object with interest. Like, that tells us nothing, but it tells us so much about the character. Telling us nothing in the sentence indicates where the character is at mentally, and that is the important information, the context of what's not being said. The next excerpt is one that my friend Dallin actually sent to me. This kind of blew my mind. I love this description so much. And this is from Brandon Taylor's Real Life. Wallace rolls over onto his stomach and puts his chin against his folded arms. Behind them are soccer fields and dormitories. The grass is very green and very straight, bordered by sharp yellow signs and fence posts. This, oh gosh, very green and very straight. This is such a great excerpt because as an editor, you might highlight that and be like, is there a synonym that we could sub here for very green? Could you say viridian? Could you say lime green and very straight? Could you use another word instead of using very, right? But I love that Brandon Taylor uses very green and very straight. It almost has this picture book-esque quality to the image. Vagary in the description saturates the image more, like it feels like a Dr. Seuss book. The grass is very green and very straight, bordered by sharp yellow signs and fence posts. We don't know what's on the signs. We don't know what the fence posts look like. We don't need to know that because as a whole, the vagary creates this very vivid image. I do think there's a way to intentionally do the wrong quote unquote thing, and very green and very straight I think is a great example of that. Picturesque advertisement of a space. The last excerpt comes from Martyr. Oh, Martyr, my beloved. And this is actually, I think, toward the end of the book. Cyrus had planned to walk around the streets, people watch, maybe post up at a bar somewhere to nurse a Coke. But Z made his absurd but charming case, and Cyrus assented. They ate happily in their bed, pizza box sitting and a towel laid out between them, eyes fixed on the flat-screen TV showing a rerun of The Office. Where the ellipses is, I did remove a section of the excerpt just to sort of focus on the other details here. This comes back to sort of that idea of ping-ponging between vagueness and specificity. For example, Cyrus had planned to walk around the streets, people watch, maybe post up at a bar somewhere. Maybe is such an interesting word choice here. A lot of the times, like, the instinct is remove these words that are hesitant. Maybe, possibly, perhaps. You don't need these words. But maybe you do, because here maybe indicates a kind of lawlessness. He's in New York City is the context. He's not from there. He's just been sort of traveling. His idea is that he'd like to sort of, I don't know, see the culture, live a poem. That's like one of Cyrus's, the character's ethoses in life. So actually be doing something, being in the world where, you know, something artistic could happen to him. But Z, who is his friend and his roommate, manages to change his mind on this. Z made made his absurd but charming case. We don't need to know what Z said because at this point we believe that he could make a charming case. So it's almost like a little element of trust in not specifying absolutely everything and not explaining absolutely everything. Then another element that I loved here, they ate happily in their bed. This is one of those things where, if I was in school, I might have crossed that out, like ate happily. Like, you don't need that. We can show that. We can indicate that through an action. But showing it on the line level kind of creates this sitcom-ish vibe to the scene that I really like. It's this happy moment. You'll understand if you read this book why this happy moment is so important, like right at this moment. So I don't think that we need to necessarily stray away from the elements that we think of as bad in writing, like this adverb. And then we close off, again, with this sort of specificity sandwich with maybe being vague, and then he's gonna nurse a Coke, which is specific, and then they ate happily in their bed being vague. We then end off on a very specific detail. Not only is there a towel laid between them, which is a very, specific image, they're also watching The Office on a flat screen TV. I love the specificity sandwich, and it's something that I've been using a little bit more in my writing to bypass some specific details where if you do say it in a vaguer manner, if there is a broadness to it, it can amplify voice, which is what I think maybe does in this excerpt. Absurd but charming case does in this excerpt, but also still give us some really grounded elements as readers we can grasp onto, like the pizza box and like the towel and like The Office on the TV. I think this is a great excerpt of how I would realistically use specificity. Sometimes when I'm reading or I'm editing work for clients or I'm editing my own work, I'll notice that I am so inundated by specifics that I just cannot focus on anything. So this excerpt, in my opinion, is a great example of how to balance that. Before we leave off on this video, as I was writing out this sort of makeshift script, wrote this kind of monologue. Great writing is not all about the words you choose, since great writing is infused by a character's voice and context, and the shape a writer aims to project onto a reader. Great writing feels intentional even in its lack of intention, and arrives on the page committed to itself. Great writing knows itself and the voice/character it holds and becomes a vessel for emotional development and story movement. Great writing can be loud or timid, embarrassing or obnoxious. It allows itself to remain what it is. Great writing also creates an impact on its reader. That can be an interior connection, a moment of reflection or education. One of my professors used to say, good writing is good thinking, and your thinking, showcased through style, voice, and story, are what make a lasting impression. Great writing is making choices that serve the story you're telling in the way you want to tell it. So that is sort of my vague attempt at a craft video. What do you think makes great writing? I'd love to hear in the comments, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye.